I think this was a very positive meeting. And whoever had the idea to bring all these European leaders together, in addition to President Zelenskyy, that was a brilliant, brilliant idea. And having it come so quickly after Alaska was also very important because now they've changed the talking points here. So this is very positive progress.
President Putin agreed that Russia would accept security guarantees for Ukraine.
I hope President Putin is going to be good. And if he's not, it's going to be a rough situation. And I hope that Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy, will do what he has to do. He has to show some flexibility. There'll be some form of security. It can't be NATO because that's just not something that would ever happen. I just want to end it. If I can save 7,000 people a week from being killed, I think that's I want to try and get to heaven if possible. I'm hearing I'm not doing well. I hear I'm really at the bottom of the totem pole. But if I can get to heaven, this will be one of the reasons.
That was former President Barack Obama's ambassador to Russia, Michael McFarland. You first heard him praising Trump's peace talks, and that was President Trump saying Putin has agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine. And it's going to be rough if he doesn't back down. Plus, Trump, in a candid moment, hopes his peace efforts gets him into heaven. Joining us now, former Deputy National Security Advisor, Katie McFarland. KT, it's always wonderful to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us. What's your assessment of where things stand now? What's your take on what's going on?
The importance of the meeting yesterday, where all the NATO European leaders and Zelenskyy were there, it shows the Russians that there's a united front, that the United States is leading a coalition of the most powerful countries in Europe, and they're on the side of Ukraine's war being over. They all seem to understand that Ukraine is going to have to give up some land. Which land? That's a big part of the debate. But the question now is, the ball's now in Putin's court. Does he want to have this meeting? He says he wants to meet with Zelenskyy. Frankly, I think if the two of them met together, just the two of them alone without President Trump, they'd probably blow up and walk out on each other. President Trump ultimately, I think, needs to be in that trilateral meeting. But the question is Putin, as President Trump always said, does Putin really want peace? Is he willing to negotiate in good faith, or does he not? And if he's not, then we have these massive and crippling economic sanctions we can bring to bear on Russia to bring them to the negotiating table.
Meaning it's oil sales, right? I mean, so the question is, why should Ukraine give up its industrial section, the Donbas region? And we know that Russia occupies 3/4 of it. It sounds unfair, but is that what needs to be done? You're just going to freeze where everything is right now, and Putin's going to have to accept more international forces inside Ukraine and U.S. air cover from the United States. I mean, how do you get Putin to accept all this and a NATO-like peacekeeping force? I mean, we know Ukraine offered Trump a $100 billion weapons deal to get security guarantees. But what is Putin going to do you think?
Well, this is the problem that President Trump has in dealing with both Putin and Zelenskyy. On one hand, he wants the war to be over, but he doesn't want it to be over at any price. He doesn't want to alienate Russia. Why? Because he wants to make sure that Russia's not so much connected to China. You know, the whole thing that President Trump has always been about, even in the beginning of the first term, was to separate Russia from China, because Russia and China together aimed at the United States is a strategic and probably existential threat to the United States. So he wants to do a deal without alienating Russia, but preserving Ukraine's independence. So he doesn't want to alienate Ukraine to get to Russia. He doesn't want to alienate Russia to get to Ukraine. He's got to thread that needle. So what's in it for Putin? Well, Putin also is looking beyond just Ukraine. Of course Putin wants Ukraine. Of course he's going to have some kind of, we have to have some kind of, trust but verify. But Putin also is looking for a relationship beyond the Ukraine war. I think it's interesting that with the meeting in Alaska, Putin just didn't bring his Secretary of Defense and his his foreign minister. He brought a lot of his economic leaders, the business leaders. They're looking to do some kind of a deal past Ukraine, looking past Ukraine to have a relationship with the U.S.
Yeah, they're in crippling stagflation and double-digit inflation. Katie McFarland, thank you so much for that. It was terrific analysis. Appreciate you so much.